Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today I'll be discussing top 5 general testing tips. These have helped me tremendously when I'm taking tests, and they've definitely paid off, and I'm hoping to share the success I've had with others. So before we start, I've seen great success in testing. I have a 1570 SAT, National Merit for the PSAT, and I've taken numerous AP tests and gotten 5s on almost all of them, and this is how I did it. So, our first tip obviously sounds very basic, but it's to just prepare. So we'll get into what to do if you don't have time to prepare or you haven't and the test is like the next day or in like an hour later. But first, if the test is in advance and you know what's happening, the first step is to genuinely try your best to block out time to get ready for this test. I definitely did this a lot more freshman and sophomore year when I had more time to prepare for these tests. And for the SAT. Nowadays, when I take tests in junior year, I definitely have less time, so I have to rely on other like test taking methods. But definitely prepare if you have the time to do so. So this would mean if it's first of all when you're preparing for a test, it's important to understand exactly what type of test it is, if that makes sense. So you could have like a vocabulary-based test where you just have to memorize, memorize, memorize. That means utilizing mnemonic devices and other methods to get those in your head. I can go over those in a separate video. They help me a lot. Um, if it's like more like essay-based questions, make sure you have like the format of how to write these essays, like an LEQ or a argumentative essay if you're taking AP Gov or something like that. Just knowing what they're looking for, how to get those points. And then if it's just like a multiple choice test that's like not vocabulary based, like SAT, that's mainly just knowing content, having strategies for math and reading, and locking in and studying by practicing. So, especially on tests like the SAT, practice makes perfect. So, the more you practice, the better you're going to do. So that's to prepare. I know that's a very basic tip, but now we're going to get into things to what to do if you per se didn't have that much time to prepare for whatever reason, you were really busy. You still have to take your test. So here's what we'll do next. So when we're taking a test, shoot, number 2, and let's say we're cooked. We haven't really prepared, but we still have to take our test because we're not going to like skip it. What to do? So let's say the test is an hour, right? And you can study real quick. If it's like I said, if it's a vocab test, I think mnemonics go a long way, especially for like short-term memory. Yeah, so really just look at questions, try to understand that vocab. But say you're taking the test and you know you haven't prepared that well. First of all, understand what you need to do and how to get points. So for example, if you're taking an LEQ in like AP World, if you're doing an LEQ, know where those points are coming from. Like you get contextualization, you get a thesis, know where those points are coming from. So even if you don't like necessarily know the content that well, you can still get those points by knowing the rubric of the test you're taking. And I can do more general videos for those in the future. But let's focus on a test like the SAT. So assuming that you haven't prepared extremely well, but you're still taking it, here's what we can do. So I know on the old SAT, the reading session was drastically different because there was like longer passages and then like 10 or 11 questions about each one, and then you had, I think it was 65 minutes or so, so that's like 13 minutes per passage. So you had more than a minute per question. And so that's the one that I took and did very well on it. So I will speak about that, but try to relate it to the digital, even though I know it's different. So when you're taking a test, no matter what level of preparation you have to just understand that it's like a game, okay? First of all, I think a good mindset to go into, like taking a test, is to treat it like a game. And I think that's a very important point, so I'm going to write it. Now, this might sound like silly or like nerdy, but I think it genuinely helps like take the pressure off, because if you treat it like a game, you understand that it's not that deep if you don't do great. Even if it is deep, you need to take that pressure off and tell yourself it's not extremely important. Because I've definitely suffered from text anxiety, like before, like not sleeping the night before tests. I was so nervous, and that's because I thought it was like life or death to do well, which it is important, and I understand that. But if you treat it like it's a game, like, oh, like I'm trying to figure this out to like solve the puzzle, it's definitely a lot less stressful, or at least that's what I have like noticed, especially in tests where there's a way to like outsmart the test makers, like the SAT. That's like trying to figure out how to do so has really helped me improve my score. So I'm just gonna give like what I like to do on tests like this, and this applies to the digital SAT as well, but I'm gonna relate it to the physical and then talk about it in digital context. So I'm gonna focus on the reading section because that's the one that I think a lot of more people struggle with, like the national average is lower. So in this reading section, it's really the number one priority is time management. So we can write that as another point. Time management is very crucial because it doesn't matter how well you know the material if it takes you 10 years to answer each question. And if it does take you 10 years to answer the question, you don't know the material that well. So, time management. I'm gonna, we'll dive into this now. So, on the digital, or on the reading for a portion of the physical SAT, it was, like I said, this is just the English section. That was, let me erase this. The reading portion section, the reading section was 52 minutes, or sorry, 52 questions and 65 minutes. And the way it was sectioned off was 5 passages, 10 or 11 questions each. And then finally, so 65 divided by 5 is 13 minutes per passage. And then also, there are different types of passages. So, types of passages. So there is one literature, one social science, one more like, I don't want to say actual science, that sounds condescending, but one like scientific experiment type, one historical, and then one that's kind of just one of these else kind of thrown together. I'll just say one more. And then one of these passages is in like a split method. The reason I'm going through all of this is just to show my own reasoning, even though this doesn't apply directly to the digital SATs, it's different. One of these passages was a dual passage. It basically was 2 shorter passages combined into one. It would ask you questions to like compare the passages. So the reason I'm saying this is because just by knowing what the reading section looked like, I can get a pretty good hint on what to focus on going forward. So basically, after taking practice tests, that's why number one is to prepare. I realized that I was really good at the scientific experiment passages and the literature passages, but the historical passages were hard for me. And social science was kind of It was kind of difficult. So I always made sure to focus on not getting the literature and scientific experiment passages done really fast, but not second guessing myself too much, because that is a problem, second guessing yourself. I really tried to focus on getting those done well, but under the 13 minutes per passage, like 10 minutes. So then whenever I got to social science and historical and the other one, I had more time because it would take me more time to answer the questions accurately. So that worked for the most part. On the SAT that I got a 1570 on, it worked okay because towards the end I ran out of time. And I was in the last passage and I had like a lot of questions to go and like not a lot of time to do them. I think I had like 10 minutes to do the last passage, and it was this was a very hard scientific passage. So even something I was good on, quote unquote, it took a while to understand it because it was difficult, and I was also very stressed because I was definitely under time. So I ended up almost running out of time, and I had to guess on a question. And this was, I'll get to this in a second, but this was question number 42 out of 52. So I skipped questions to come back to this, which I'll talk about in a second because that is also a very good skill, knowing when to skip. So I skipped questions to move on to ones that I thought would be easier. And um, I I turned back to this question with 30 seconds left. There's not enough time for me to read the actual text that the lines refer to, because that's how the physical SAT worked. There's questions that like it referred specifically to lines in the long passage, and you had to say which one matched it best. So I was cooked because I had one question left, um, like one question left, 30 seconds to go. I didn't have to. It was a long question. It wasn't like easy, something you could remember from the passage. I had to look for specific textual evidence, and so I just didn't have time. So I read the question, and so let's read this. Which choice best supports the idea that Armstrong and colleagues' hypothesis about ferrous iron decomposition in early Earth's magma may have implications beyond its effect on the oxygen content in early Earth's mantle? So it's a which choice best supports ferrous iron. It was about, if I remember correctly, it was about how um, the decomposition of this compound basically like contributed to the oxygen that made up the Earth's mantle and allows us to live. And so this is asking for implications beyond its effect on that oxygen content. So what looks for more? And so I had 30 seconds, right? Like 30 seconds, that's not enough time to locate these places. It's not enough time to locate these informational pieces in the passage and read them and then interpret them to find out which one answers the question. It's not a hard question, but there's just no time. So I guessed, and I guessed D, but that was right. And it was a guess, but it was an educated guess, and let me tell you why. So as you can see here, it says but dot 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 adds. So without reading it, I know that it's like contrasting to the previous sentence. Like that's what but means. Like it's like but mean and however, right? It's like he was short, but he was fast. It contrasts. Not even contrast, but adds. So which short choice best supports the idea that their hypothesis had additional implications? I thought that was a pretty good choice because but like adds something to what was already talked about, which was, and obviously we know that the whole story was talking about this hypothesis, but it's adding something just by that one word, but. And so I just put D, just prayed, and it ended up being right. So that's an example of how trying to beat the test takers and treating it like a game, because in that moment it was one question. Like I knew it was like I knew I wanted to get it right, but like it was in the grand scheme of things that's not going to matter that much, and I knew that, and I knew that this was a hard reading passage, so it probably had a curve anyway, but I wanted to get it right, and so I went with that. So I didn't stress myself out completely. I was like, okay, out of these, but is indicating contrast and it's adding something, we're going to go with that. And then time was called, I circled it, then time was called, and then we were done. And so that's how, like, treating it like a game and really just trying to think. Like, this was definitely a shortcut, and there's no guarantee it's right, but I'd say it gives me better odds than 1/4. Like, maybe like a 50% shot, and it ended up working out. So always look for things like that, especially if you're low on time and you need to do something. Try not to just make it a guessing game. But obviously, if you need to make it a guessing game, guess. Don't just leave it blank. Okay, and then finally, my last tip for tests is to just move on if you don't know at the moment. And the reason I say at the moment is because your brain works really weirdly, or at least mine does, and random things make me remember random things. So, and those random like stimuli are typically other questions for me. So, especially if this is like a vocab test or like an anatomy or like physiology test, where it's just pure memorization and I'm stuck between two things. A lot of times, another question, especially if it's a very long test, can give me the information I need about that question I'm stuck on. It'll just either help me remember, it'll jog my memory, or it'll flat out tell me the answer in just another question. And So that's why just moving on, not giving up when you're stuck, can help you out quite a bit, because you can always come back, assuming that like the test will let you do that, but most tests will. So that's one piece of very helpful information for me. Just move on if you don't know. And then in the context of this number 42, remember I told you that was question 42 out of 52. So when I got to this question the first time, I said I had 10 minutes left in the passage. It only took me like 2 minutes to read the passage, so I had 8 minutes left for 11 questions, because this was one of the ones with 11 questions. 8 minutes left for 11 questions. That's more than a question a minute. I'm kind of cooked. And so I see this. I'm like, kind of panicking. I said to try to stay calm, but I was kind of panicking. And I was like, I don't know this right now, and I don't feel like reading all these answer choices because it's just not going to make sense. It's not going to fit together. So I tried it for maybe like a minute, which is already way more time than I should be taking. And then I just don't know the answer. So I could either struggle on it for another 2 minutes and not finish questions I know how to do. And I know there will be questions because I know I'm good at interpreting graphs. I know there's 2 questions about interpreting graphs. Or I can move on and do those questions, especially the interpreting graphs one, get those extra points, and then come back and do my Hail Mary, which worked out. And so by moving on, I was able to really just lock in on the other questions that were actually much easier. There's easy, like, what does this paragraph mean in that context? Like, that's just easy and common sense. Whereas this one is definitely harder. It's rated a 3, which is the hardest difficulty of an SAT question. And so I didn't know it. So that's like why, especially on these timed tests, you can't get sucked into just trying to solve it. Because if you do, you're just cooked. Because there's always the opportunity. Like, it's just one question. You know, it's literally just one question. It's worth just the same amount as all the other ones, but it's harder. So get those easy points. Don't be like valiant and try to like, I'm gonna grind until I get this, because then you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So move on if you don't know. And then also, by moving on and getting those ones that you know you can get, when you come back, it feels so much less important to actually solve the question. Like, obviously you'd want to, but I know, like, once I've looked the whole test over, front and back, I've done every question I know how to do, and there's a few I don't know how to do. I remember thinking, oh, I'll get a good grade even if I don't figure these out. It's not that deep. Obviously, I'll get a better grade if I figure them out, but if I don't figure out, it's not that deep. And by taking that pressure off, your brain just works better. Like, I feel dumber when I'm stressed. Like, I just can't think. I have a mental fog. It's harder to read and comprehend effectively. But when it's relaxed, it's low key. There's no pressure. It's chill, and I can glide through it. So once that pressure kicks in, you need to do anything you can to get the pressure off. And for me, that's doing everything I know how to do. And then on the ones I don't know how to do, we go back to tip number 2. Oops. Go back to tip number 2, which is treat it like a game. And I know it's a game because I know this question isn't that consequential, but I like to solve it. And so there's no pressure. And half the time, or maybe more than half the time, hopefully, you end up getting it right. So I know this is very SAT heavy, and I didn't really talk about the digital SAT because I don't have as much experience with this, mainly paper. But I think the strategies remain the same for sure. Really trying to look for those like slight ways to cut time, especially if you need to, ways to like narrow, like make your chances better than the 1 in 25, 1 in 4 chance that you'd have by randomly guessing. Really utilize that process of elimination, because one half, 50%, a lot better than 25%. And that works on digital SAT, on vocabulary based tests. You know it's not that. Something it works on like AP tests. It's really just try to think, slow it down and think, cross off answers. So these are this is why I call it universal or general testing tips, because they work on everything. So that's why I haven't gone super in depth onto anything. I'm just speaking from experience here. So that's all for this video. I'll definitely do more deep dives into like the digital SAT, PSAT, certain AP tests that I've taken, and future videos that I just wanted to put this out there for people struggling with test taking in general. So this is what's worked for me. Let me know if it works for you in the comments, and let me know what other videos you'd like to see. Thank you.